The Mists of Tanindua. Chapter 1. Legends of the Past. The vast South Pacific was a living entity, its waves rising and falling like the chest of a slumbering giant. Mists drifted atop its surface, a shimmering veil that blurred the horizon and merged with the grey sky above. The distant echo of a sonar ping pierced the fog, a rhythmic beacon that warned of proximity and potential danger. Amidst this expanse of water and mist, a fleet of allied ships moved in formation. Their dark silhouettes were barely discernible, their movements meticulous and coordinated. The distant hum of engines and the occasional shout of command were the only breaks in the South Pacific's rhythmic lullaby. On the deck of the leading ship, a figure stood apart. Officer Charles Brennan's frame was tall and imposing, his navy uniform crisp against the maritime backdrop. Even under the weight of responsibility, there was a fierce determination in his eyes, a fire that shone brighter than the sparse morning light. He looked across the waters, aware of the lurking threats that the ocean concealed. His hands clasped behind him, he inhaled the salty air, a brief moment of respite before the storm. "Gentlemen," Charles's voice echoed, strong and unwavering. "Today, we navigate waters that have seen heroes born and legends made. Each one of you has shown courage and resilience in the face of adversity. I have no doubt that together, we will overcome whatever challenges lie ahead." A murmur of affirmation swept across the deck. The sailors stood tall, their faces a mix of determination and apprehension. The stories of Nazi U-boats and the perils of the South Pacific were not lost on them. Every man was aware that beneath the ocean's calm facade, danger lurked. Charles continued, "We are not merely defending our nations but the very ideals that define us. Freedom, democracy, and the belief that every individual has the right to a life of dignity and respect." A subtle shift in the air signaled a change. The sonar's rhythmic echo became more urgent, its pace quickening. The atmosphere aboard the ship grew tense, every sailor alert and ready. "All hands on deck," came the shout, echoing down the corridors and through the metal stairwells. Men scrambled into position, eyes trained on the mists that enveloped them. And then, like ghosts emerging from the fog, the ominous outlines of Nazi U-boats appeared. They moved swiftly, their intent clear. The South Pacific theater was about to witness a confrontation that would be etched into its annals for generations to come. The serene ambience of the morning was shattered. The roar of engines, the clamor of alarms, and the thunderous blasts of artillery filled the air. Brennan, at the helm of his ship, was ready to lead his crew into battle. The legends of the past were about to be reborn. The initial appearance of the U-boats had been like shadows, sneaking from the folds of mist. But their intentions were starkly clear as the first torpedo broke the surface, cutting through the water with a haunting swiftness towards the allied ships. "Hard starboard," Charles commanded, his voice ringing clear above the turmoil. His ship lurched to the side in response, but not fast enough to avoid the explosion that followed. A plume of water shot upwards, raining down upon the deck and drenching the men. The other allied vessels were also under fire, with torpedoes creating a perilous maze on the water's surface. The once coordinated fleet was now a scene of chaos, as ships desperately tried to maneuver away from the destructive path of the Nazi onslaught. Charles's leadership was unwavering. Even amidst the bedlam, he shouted commands, directing the firing of their own torpedoes and coordinating maneuvers with nearby vessels. The deck shook with the recoil of their guns, as they took shots at the surfaced U-boats and attempted to sink them. But the enemy was relentless. Another U-boat emerged directly in front of Charles's ship, its deck gun aiming straight at them. Before they could react, a deafening blast echoed, and the front of the ship was engulfed in flames. "Fire teams, front and center. Protect the munitions," Charles barked, even as another explosion rattled the ship from the side. The metallic taste of smoke and gunpowder permeated the air, stinging eyes and lungs. Men shouted and scrambled, some trying to douse the flames while others returned fire or assisted the wounded. Amidst the cacophony, Charles spotted a sailor, a young lad no older than 19, pinned under a fallen beam. Without hesitation, Charles rushed to his aid, trying to lift the heavy metal. With the help of another crew member, they managed to free the young man, who gasped for air, his face pale but grateful. The battle raged on, each side unleashing its full might. Yet, despite their valiant efforts, the odds were slowly tilting against the Allies. Charles's ship took another hit, this time critical, causing a massive breach in its hull. Water began to flood in, and the vessel started to list. All hands, abandon ship. Came the tragic command. Lifeboats were deployed amidst the chaos, and sailors, some injured, others in shock, began to evacuate. Charles assisted as many men as he could, ensuring they made it to the boats, but he himself was caught in an explosion's aftershock, thrown overboard into the cold, unforgiving South Pacific. The sounds of battle became muffled as he sank, his vision blurred by the swirling waters around him. Instinct and training kicked in, and Charles kicked upwards, breaking the surface and gasping for breath. Around him, the battle continued, the sky lit up by the fires of sinking ships and the horizon marred by plumes of smoke. Floating amidst the debris and chaos, Charles Brennan clung to a piece of his ship's wreckage, the weight of his wet uniform threatening to pull him under. He was adrift in the vast ocean, a lone figure amidst the remnants of a devastating confrontation. As night began to fall, the sounds of battle faded, replaced by the soft lapping of waves and the distant cries of sailors. Charles, drawing on his last reserves of strength, vowed to survive, not just for himself, but for the legacy he wished to leave behind. The inky blackness of the night seemed to swallow the South Pacific whole. Stars peeked from the vast heavens above, their cold light reflecting off the calm but merciless ocean waves. The grand naval battle that had taken place mere hours ago was now eerily silent, replaced by the solitude of the vast waters. Charles Brennan, once the commanding presence on the deck of his ship, now clung desperately to a fragment of that very vessel. His fingers gripped the wooden plank, every muscle in his body aching from the cold and exhaustion. The salt water stung his cuts and scrapes, constant reminders of the horrors he had just endured. Every now and then, he would hear distant cries or shouts, desperate calls from other sailors adrift like him. But as the hours dragged on, these became fewer and farther between. With a heavy heart, Charles realized that many of his comrades had succumbed to the sea's cold embrace. Though battered and exhausted, Charles's spirit remained unbroken. He kept his mind active, thinking of his family back home, particularly of his young daughter, Ellen. The thought of her innocent smile, her bright eyes filled with wonder, was a beacon of hope in the enveloping darkness. He was determined to survive and see her once again. Throughout the night, Charles fought to stay awake, fearing that if he succumbed to sleep, he might lose his grip on the plank and be claimed by the depths below. As dawn began to break, casting a pale orange hue across the horizon, he spotted something in the distance, another piece of wreckage, larger and more stable than his own. Summoning his last reserves of strength, Charles paddled towards it. As he got closer, he realized it was a lifeboat, overturned, but intact. With great effort, he managed to climb onto it, finding a brief respite from the cold water. Now somewhat shielded from the elements, Charles allowed himself a moment of rest. His thoughts wandered to the events of the past day, the ambush, the sounds of battle, the brave men he had commanded, many of whom were now lost to the sea. Filled his eyes as he remembered their faces, their camaraderie, and their sacrifice. But amidst the grief, there was also a burning desire to make it back, to tell their stories, and to ensure that their heroism was not forgotten. Drifting on the lifeboat, Charles found solace in a small leather-bound journal he had always carried with him. It was soaked but still intact. Over the past months, he had documented his experiences during the war, sharing his thoughts, fears, and hopes. With a makeshift pen, he began to write, detailing the events of the battle, of the men who fought bravely by his side, and of his current predicament. Days turned into nights and back into days as Charles drifted in the vast expanse of the South Pacific. He survived on rainwater and the few provisions he managed to salvage from the boat. But more than food or water, it was hope that kept him alive, the hope of being rescued, of reuniting with his family, and of sharing the tales of bravery and sacrifice with the world. Unknown to Charles, the tides and currents of the South Pacific were slowly pushing him towards a mysterious and uncharted territory, a land of legends, myths, and ancient tales. A land that would change the course of his life forever. The steady ticking of a grandfather clock echoed throughout the Brennan family living room, breaking the silence of a cool Boston evening. Shadows danced on the walls as the flames from a roaring fireplace cast a warm, amber glow across the room. The walls, lined with old photographs, medals, and naval memorabilia, told tales of generations past, of brave souls and the legacies they left behind. Amidst the cozy setting, young Charlie sat on a plush rug, his gaze fixed intently on an old black and white photograph of a naval officer. The officer's piercing eyes and strong posture bore an uncanny resemblance to Charlie's own features. "Grandma," he began, holding up the photograph, "was this great-grandpa Charles?" Ellen Brennan, sitting in a plush armchair with a family album spread across her lap, looked down at her eager grandson. "Yes, Charlie," she replied with a soft smile. "That's him, during the days of World War II. Brave, strong, and filled with dreams of a brighter tomorrow." The room was filled with the scent of aged paper and burning wood. Charlie's young mind raced with images of battles at sea, of ships and submarines, and of heroes who defended their land and their people. "Do you miss him, Grandma?" Charlie asked, his eyes reflecting the flickering light from the fireplace. Ellen paused, her fingers tracing the outline of her father's face in the photograph. "Every single day," she whispered. "He was more than just a naval officer, Charlie. He was a loving father, a dreamer, and an adventurer." He sat in silence for a moment, the weight of history and family legacy enveloping the room. The walls, filled with remnants of the past, bore witness to their quiet reflection. Ellen, taking a deep breath, began her tale. "Your great-grandfather, Charles Brennan, was lost at sea during a naval skirmish. But before that, he sent us letters filled with love, hope, and tales of his adventures." She reached into the album, pulling out a neatly folded piece of paper. With trembling hands, she unfolded it, revealing Charles's elegant handwriting. "Listen to this, Charlie," she began, her voice filled with emotion. As Ellen read excerpts from the letter, Charlie visualized the grandeur of the South Pacific during World War II, the anticipation before battle, and the deep bonds formed between the men at sea. The words painted a picture of hope in the face of adversity, of longing for family, and dreams of reuniting. Once she finished, Charlie looked up, eyes gleaming with a mixture of admiration and sadness. "Grandma," he hesitated, "what happened after the ship sank? Did anyone try to find him?" Ellen sighed, her gaze drifting towards the window. "We received word of the sinking, and the Navy did what they could. But the vastness of the South Pacific and the chaos of war made it difficult. We waited, hoped, and prayed, but he was never found." Charlie felt a lump in his throat. The heroics and adventures of his great-grandfather, though inspiring, were also tinged with the sorrow of loss. "But Charlie," Ellen added, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder, "always remember that legends never truly die. They live on in stories, in memories, and most importantly, in our hearts." With that, she handed him the leather-bound journal from the album. "This," she whispered, "is his diary, filled with his thoughts, dreams, and adventures. One day, when you're ready, you can dive into its pages and maybe, just maybe, uncover the mysteries that still linger." As the evening wore on, the room filled with tales of Charles Brennan, of his bravery, dreams, and the legacy he left behind. Charlie, filled with a newfound sense of purpose, clutched the journal close, eager to uncover the enigma of the past and keep the legend of his great-grandfather alive.